A single explosion in the night, and the world holds its breath. In Gaza, hundreds of lives can change in the blink of an eye. But while missiles rain down and families scramble for safety, an equally fierce battle is raging far from the sounds of war, a diplomatic struggle with the highest possible stakes. Will the world's power brokers be able to stop Gaza's slide into full-scale collapse? Or are we all witnessing the beginning of a catastrophe that could reshape the entire Middle East, and maybe the world economy itself? Tonight we're diving deep into the reality behind the headlines, the humanitarian disaster unfolding in Gaza, the ruthless calculus of hostage negotiations, and the delicate web of international diplomacy. What's really happening behind those closed doors in Doha, Cairo, and Washington? And what does it mean for the future of business, technology, and global stability? The answers and the consequences are bigger than you might think. Let's start with the facts on the ground. Over the past 4 days, Israeli airstrikes have killed more than 100 Palestinians each night, many of them entire families. The official numbers from Gaza's health ministry are staggering, over 53,000 dead since the beginning of the campaign, and that number only rises as new strikes flatten residential areas and tent cities housing refugees. Hospitals across the Strip are teetering on the edge, not just from bombing, but from a strict Israeli blockade that's choked off food, fuel, and medical supplies since March. The International Committee of the Red Cross calls the humanitarian situation catastrophic, and the World Health Organization warns of a critical shortage of life-saving medicines. This isn't a conventional battlefield. In Gaza, war is being fought in neighborhoods, streets, and the crowded corridors of battered hospitals. Hospitals are overwhelmed with casualties. Many are children, Gaza's health ministry spokesperson reported in a chilling phone call to Reuters. Several cases of amputations. Hospitals, which have been hit repeatedly by the occupation, are struggling with shortages of medical supplies. It's an emotional punch. Try to imagine searching for survivors in the ruins as your phone buzzes with news of more lost friends and family. Try picturing parents, desperate to save their children with nothing but makeshift bandages and the hope that help will somehow break through the blockade. But why has it come to this point? The immediate spark was the Hamas-led attack on October 7, 2023, when gunmen crossed into Israel, killing around 200 people and seizing some 250 hostages. That attack stunned Israel and triggered a military response on a scale Gaza hadn't seen in years. Israel's declared goal: the elimination of Hamas's military and government capabilities. But achieving that has meant warfare on a scale that, for many, now threatens the very fabric of Palestinian society in Gaza. Yet this crisis is not just a military one, it's fundamentally humanitarian and political, and the world has been quick to take sides. The United Nations, the EU, regional powers like Egypt and Qatar, and even the United States are all now scrambling to broker a ceasefire before things spiral even further out of control. The UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres, has sounded the alarm. We need a permanent ceasefire now. I am alarmed by the expansion of the Israeli military operation. The EU's Foreign Affairs Chief, Josep Borrell, is equally blunt. Violence must stop immediately. A return to negotiations is the only way forward. Meanwhile, the Israeli Defense Forces claim their strikes are strictly aimed at Hamas infrastructure. An IDF spokesperson insisted, "Our strikes targeted Hamas infrastructure used for terrorist activities. We are committed to minimizing civilian harm." But as the death toll rises, that claim is increasingly hard to square with the images flooding out of the Strip: bombed-out buildings, burning tents, families shattered in seconds. Hamas, for its part, says it won't free any more hostages unless Israel agrees to a ceasefire. Hamas official Taher al-Nono told reporters, "We are ready to reach a fair agreement that secures the rights of our people." But Israeli officials remain adamant. They want their hostages released without any commitment to ending the war. In the standoff, the people of Gaza pay the highest price. Consider for a moment what the stakes are if diplomacy fails. The future holds 3 terrifying possibilities: a regional war igniting across borders and drawing in groups like Hezbollah, a prolonged grinding conflict that radicalizes a new generation, or a fragile truce that leaves all the deepest wounds unhealed. None offer a real solution for the 2 million people barely surviving in Gaza, or for Israelis still grieving and fearing for the future. In the shadows of this chaos, back-channel negotiations grind forward in a race against time. Egypt and Qatar, once again the region's go-to mediators, are hosting urgent talks, with the United States providing behind-the-scenes muscle. Egypt has offered to host both Israeli and Hamas representatives in Cairo, while in Doha, indirect talks inch along, reportedly stuck on the most basic question of all. Will Israel actually end the war if some hostages are released? According to one Palestinian official close to the talks, Hamas is flexible about the number of hostages it can free, but the problem has always been over Israel's commitment to end the war. The frustration is palpable. In one striking development, Hamas proposed releasing elderly and sick hostages in exchange for a temporary ceasefire, a move that could save lives on both sides, but only if both governments are willing to budge. For now, Israel's position is unchanged. Release the hostages first, and then we'll talk. This cold calculus leaves humanitarian convoys halted at the Rafah border and the people of Gaza facing ever greater hunger. Meanwhile, international pressure is building. The United Nations has called an emergency Security Council session. Several EU countries are demanding an independent investigation into the latest civilian casualties, citing possible violations of international law. The Arab League has labeled the strikes a massacre and called for outside intervention. Even the United States, Israel's closest strategic ally, has started urging Israel to exercise restraint and protect civilian lives. But at the same time, U.S. officials reaffirm their ironclad commitment to Israel's security, a balancing act that leaves many wondering how far Washington is really willing to go to force a compromise. Here's a chilling thought. What happens if the ceasefire talks collapse entirely? Without a deal, the IDF's plan to seize even more territory in Gaza could trigger a bloodbath and possibly drag in other regional actors. The UN warns that the conflict could spill over into Lebanon, or even further afield, sparking a regional conflagration. Global oil prices, already jittery, could spike overnight. Supply chains across the Middle East and beyond could be thrown into chaos. For business leaders and investors, the question is no longer if the conflict will affect them, but when and how badly. Yet even if a temporary truce emerges, the core issues will remain dangerously unresolved. Who will govern Gaza the day after the shooting stops? How can trust be rebuilt after years of bloodshed and broken promises? And will the world finally address the fundamental grievances, economic devastation, collective punishment, the lack of a political horizon, fueling this endless cycle? As the world watches, the clock is ticking. Both sides are digging in, the civilian suffering is mounting, and international mediators are running out of options. And still, one question looms over every negotiation, every airstrike, every diplomatic phone call. Will anyone find the courage and the leverage to break the deadlock before Gaza is lost to history as a cautionary tale of missed opportunities and endless war? But before we explore the possible paths out of this nightmare, before we examine the secret deals, the regional power plays, and the technological arms race lurking in the background, let's pause and consider. Is the world truly prepared for the price of failure in Gaza's crisis? Or are we, right now, standing on the edge of a new era of conflict that could redraw borders, unsettle economies, and test the limits of human resilience? As the world watches the crisis in Gaza intensify, a chilling question hangs in the air. What comes next if negotiation after negotiation collapses? Are we on the verge of a humanitarian abyss, or is there still a sliver of hope, however fragile, that prevents this conflict from spiraling into an even deeper catastrophe? Let's look beyond the headlines and try to imagine the paths that might unfold from here and what they may mean for the future, not just of Gaza, not just of Israel, but for the entire region and, by extension, the world. To truly understand the stakes, we need to explore the possible scenarios that experts, diplomats, and policymakers are debating behind closed doors right now. First, and perhaps most feared, is the scenario of regional war. This isn't just a theoretical worry. As Israeli airstrikes multiply and civilian casualties mount, the possibility that neighboring actors such as Hezbollah or other groups could be pulled in becomes more real by the day. According to diplomats at the UN and EU, a spillover into Lebanon or Syria could ignite a broader Middle Eastern war, shattering whatever fragile stability remains. We are only one miscalculation away from calamity, warns a senior EU diplomat involved in the ceasefire talks. Such a conflict would not only multiply human suffering, but could also threaten global economic stability. Oil prices, international shipping, and critical tech assets are all in the crosshairs. The war in Gaza is not isolated. Its reverberations could shake markets, trigger refugee flows, and reshape alliances across continents. The United States has already increased its diplomatic and military presence in the region as a signal, to allies and adversaries alike, of just how seriously it takes the risk of escalation. The second scenario is perhaps more insidious and in many ways more likely: prolonged conflict. Ceasefire talks continue to stall, aid remains blocked, and violence becomes a grim background noise to everyday life in Gaza and southern Israel. This is the scenario that experts at the International Committee of the Red Cross call the slow-motion collapse, where infrastructure, healthcare, and social order break down under the relentless pressure of blockade and bombardment. Over time, this breeds not just more suffering, but deeper resentment and a new generation shaped by trauma and anger. Here's a sharp quote from Miriam Berger, spokesperson for the ICRC. "The humanitarian situation in Gaza is dire. Civilians are paying the price for this conflict. And make no mistake, in this scenario, it's not just Gaza or Israel that suffers. Every failed negotiation, every strike, every child wounded or displaced deepens the region's wounds and makes future reconciliation harder to achieve. The likelihood of radicalization grows, feeding a cycle of violence that could persist for decades. But there is a third path, tenuous though it may be, a scenario some in the international community are desperately working toward: the fragile truce. Imagine, for a moment, Egypt or Qatar brokers a stopgap deal, perhaps involving the staged release of hostages for a temporary ceasefire, or a limited reopening of border crossings for aid. The guns might fall silent, at least for a while, giving exhausted civilians and overburdened hospitals a brief respite. Yet even in this best-case outcome, the underlying issues, the blockade, the hostages, the competing national narratives, remain unsolved. A return to negotiations is the only way forward, stresses EU Foreign Policy Chief Josep Borrell. The risk of relapse is ever present, but even a fragile truce could plant the seeds for something more enduring, a framework, however imperfect, for future dialogue. What does all of this mean for you, watching this from your home, perhaps feeling both horrified and helpless by the scale of tragedy unfolding on your screen? First, we must understand that the crisis in Gaza is not just a distant tragedy. It is a mirror reflecting the interconnectedness of our world. Shocks in one region cascade across borders, affecting everything from the price of your groceries to the tech in your pocket, to the values that shape your political system. When food convoys are delayed or tech supply chains are threatened, ordinary people everywhere feel the consequences. This is not just theory. In 2022, supply shocks in the Middle East sent ripple effects across global markets. The pattern is repeating. If you work in business or technology, pay close attention. Instability in the Middle East endangers trade routes, energy supplies, and critical tech infrastructure. Can your company adapt to sudden disruptions? Are you invested in sustainable or conflict-resilient supply chains? These may sound like abstract questions now, but in moments of crisis they can determine profits, losses, even survival. On a human level, there's another lesson, a moral one. The Gaza crisis is an urgent reminder of how fragile peace can be, and how easy it is to lose sight of shared humanity when confronted by violence. It challenges us, wherever we live, to demand accountability, not just from leaders thousands of miles away, but from those who represent us locally. Advocacy, whether through letters, protest, or civic engagement, does have an impact. International pressure has, in past conflicts, helped to pause violence and open up corridors for aid. But perhaps the most practical benefit from understanding these events comes from looking at how the world's most influential players respond. Governments, tech companies, humanitarian organizations, each has a unique role to play. When you see the UN Secretary General demanding a ceasefire, or the World Health Organization warning of medical shortages, or even when a data center in Tel Aviv slows down because of a missile strike, you're witnessing the interconnected machinery of global crisis management at work. The ability to read these signals, to see how crises are contained or allowed to spiral, can help you make better decisions in your own life, whether personal, professional, or political. So, back to our central question. Is there any realistic hope that global diplomacy, combined with powerful economic and technological interests, can prevent Gaza's total collapse? Or are we staring into the abyss of a wider disaster? The sobering answer is that, as of today, global diplomacy is racing against time and tragedy. Every peace initiative faces daunting obstacles: political mistrust, competing national interests, and the sheer momentum of violence. Economic and technological interdependence, the fact that Israel and its neighbors trade, that data and goods cross these borders, that oil flows and global tech hubs depend on regional calm, offers a powerful incentive for restraint. But incentives are not guarantees. Experience shows that the threat of economic meltdown or regional chaos can stiffen the resolve of negotiators and bring rivals to the table. This is seen every time international markets wobble or when a vital pipeline is threatened. It might sound cynical, but sometimes it is these shared interests, more than appeals to conscience, that finally force a pause. Yet diplomacy's power is not absolute. Without a willingness to address the root causes, the status of Gaza, the plight of civilians, the mutual distrust between peoples, even the best negotiated ceasefire is, as one analyst put it, a band-aid on a bullet wound. Still, there are glimmers of possibility. Egypt has renewed its offer to host comprehensive talks. The U.S., while reaffirming its commitment to Israel's security, is quietly pressuring both sides to limit civilian harm. The Red Cross, WHO, and local NGOs are scrambling to keep hospitals and aid flowing despite impossible odds. And among the exhausted citizens of Gaza and Israel, there are still voices, small but determined, calling not for revenge, but for some kind of life after war. Perhaps the real secret, the fact that rarely makes front pages, is that even in these darkest moments, history shows that change often begins when ordinary people, diplomats, and even adversaries decide they have more to lose by continuing the fight than by making peace. In 1978, the Camp David Accords seemed impossible. In 1993, the Oslo handshake caught the world by surprise. Each time the world was sure disaster was inevitable, until a small window opened. Are we at such a moment again? It's impossible to say. But as UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres says, we need a permanent ceasefire now. So what can you do? Don't look away. Stay informed. Read beyond the surface. Challenge simplistic narratives. Share this video if you think others need to see it. Use your voice. Support organizations bringing aid. Demand your leaders take a principled stand. History is full of unexpected turns, and the pressure of global attention has changed the course of wars before. Let's refuse to accept endless cycles of tragedy as inevitable. The stakes are too high, the suffering too great, and the potential for change, however slim, too important to ignore. Thanks for watching. If you found this video informative, please subscribe, share your thoughts below, and check out our playlist for more deep dives into the world's most urgent stories. Because only together, by staying engaged and demanding better, can we hope to shape a more just and peaceful world.